Welcome to another session of Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. And I got a really cool topic for you today. It's on the topic of strategic talent development. And I know, given some of the economic cycles and there's been layoffs happening, that a lot of people aren't thinking about developing talent and growing talent pools and things like that strategically. But these are the times actually when you're slow in the recruitment process and the demand may not be here today, but you know the demand's going to come back tomorrow, are the times that you really should start to think strategic and utilize your time wisely in building out some long-term programs. And so I've got two experts on this topic today, Steve Williams and Ashleigh Koehler, and they're from HTD Talent Solutions. And we're talking on the topic of hire, training, and deploying workers. And so, you talk about building talent pools, and there's this immigrate, recruit, and I call it kind of a buy strategy. The hire, train, deploy is really a build talent strategy by training them, building talent, and giving people the skills you need for the jobs within your organization. So Ashleigh, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day. Can you give a little bit about your background? And you're going to be talking from the client side because you've implemented this at one of your large organizations.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me back here again. I'm excited to be back on your show. I'm Ashleigh Koehler. I know a lot of you have seen me on here before talking about my career journey. I started in the talent industry about 15 years ago, fell into staffing. I've worked on the staffing side. I've worked in the VMS world. I've worked in the MSP world, and I've also been on the buy side. So when I was working at JPMorgan Chase, I ran the IT project services, the global SOW group, but I also built out and implemented our emerging talent program, which is the hire, train, deploy program. So I loved what I did there so much. It was really quite rewarding to put so many people to work through that program. So when the opportunity came up to join HTD Talent, it was a no-brainer for me. Now I get to help more people start their careers, and I get to help more clients achieve their diversity goals. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
That's so cool, Steve. And you're a pioneer in this industry on the building out programs side, on the vendor side. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into this very unique way to create talent pools and develop skills for organizations.
Certainly. And of course, as Ashleigh said, thank you for the opportunity and the chance to talk and kind of deep dive into some of these things. I've been in the talent industry for a little over 20 years. Jeff, you were mentioning earlier about being an IT recruiter back in the Y2K days. I was right there with you, so understand that those days quite well. And just by nature of I had a technical background, so IT staffing came very, very simply to me, frankly. And then you progress the career and you start getting into solutions and having this interesting kind of aspect of bringing new concepts to market was really where I was finding my niche. And lo and behold, a former boss of mine had kind of ended up at this company where they were just building. They had just brought in some venture capital, and they were building this next new thing. And he called me, and he's like, "Hey, this is what you really love to do, and we need somebody who to help us figure these sorts of things out." And so that was the beginning of me stepping into what is now known as the hire, train, deploy space. This was back in 2016, when the first sort of iteration of venture capital came in. Back then, we didn't even call it hire, train, deploy. Nobody really knew what the moniker was going to be. 99% of the time, we were educating employers of what the concept was and really holding their hand through the process of execution. And so it's been a rocket ship ever since. A lot of learning curves, which is always fun, right? And it's one of the most unique things I've ever been attached to in terms of seeing the outcomes of what you're creating and actually being attached to them, right? It's great to build a software and see it in action, but this is actually investing in people up front, seeing their journey of sometimes struggle of acquiring a new skill set, but then seeing them being attached to an outcome, which is launching their career. And then you see the confidence bloom and you really see them take off as individuals. And to be attached to that has been very, very rewarding for me over the years.
That's really cool. And so, the why always comes up in a lot of the conversations I've had with people on the different concepts that are out there and things I'm talking about. Like, from a client perspective and actually societal plus individual perspective, what is some of the whys and the benefits of this model for those stakeholders?
I'll go ahead and start from the client perspective. So back when I was really learning about hire, train, deploy and emerging talent, just kind of peeling back the layers on things and found out that we were already placing some of that talent, but through an integrator where they were marking up the prices, and we also could not convert them at the end of the contract. So that's when we thought, let's look at this a little bit differently. And initially it was about cost savings and about being able to convert the talent at the end of it, since they had already developed so much experience with us at the bank. But what it turned into after people really started to adopt the program was a full-time hiring strategy. It was a different talent avenue for us. And it helped us start to look at hiring practices differently, strategically, and really look at that to help us with our diversity hiring numbers as well.
Oh, that's cool. And on the diversity front, like, how did that work? And why did that become something that was really of benefit? Like, and how did that increase your diversity numbers?
Well, the suppliers were able to build out those classes, those cohorts, based on our definition of diversity. So we knew that we needed more women in tech. And that's a huge thing for everyone. So we're able to build out those 100% women in tech classes. So being able to be strategic and upfront and really plan ahead gave us the opportunity to really work with the suppliers and really make it part of our workforce solution and strategy.
That's really cool. So it was a situation where you're hiring the diverse talent and then providing them with the skills through the training and the courseware that you brought them through to give them the skills they need to be successful in their careers going forward. So that's really a cool concept there. And it's amazing offshoot of it, right? And so, I think I've already answered a little bit of the question, Steve, on, what's in it for some of the individuals coming through these programs and more of a societal thing. But I know you've probably got a ton of other case studies of benefits to individuals and things that you've seen in the market when deploying solutions like this.
Yeah, for sure. It's and a lot of it's just kind of outcroppings of especially a handful of years ago, the economy and just the pace of innovation, right, which never slows down, right? And that certainly leads to corporate expectations. Well, I need talent with this kind of skill set so we can keep up with innovation, right? And but our education system, wonderful as it is, wasn't built to keep up with the pace of innovation, right? And that becomes the beginning of the skills gap that has been so well documented, even to the point that universities don't defend themselves against it anymore because it's not their responsibility to close that skills gap, right? And then on the talent side, people coming out of college, like, well, I just spent 4, maybe 5 years acquiring this skill. So, but how is it that I'm still missing that last little bit that you're telling me I need to become an entry level, developer or technician in your organization? And so that's their reality, right? And there's a lot of frustration and confusion about, okay, well, why didn't someone tell me this a long time ago, right? And it's just the nature of society and how things are, especially in the tech space. And they get a lot of interviews, right, where they're told, hey, we love your energy and enthusiasm, but we need you to get a couple years of experience before you qualify for some of our roles because they are complex, right? And then the question becomes, well, how do I get that experience without someone hiring me, in the whole chicken and egg argument, right? And then when our model, this hire, train, deploy concept comes along, right? It's almost as simple as, look, we see you, we know you're frustrated, and we understand why, and we're okay with that. We're going to hire you anyway, regardless of your skills gaps. Then we're going to give you the exact skills that everyone's telling you they wish you had coming out of school. But we're not done yet, because then we're actually going to attach it to an outcome, which is what they typically need foremost, right? Is the outcome of you actually walking in the front door and launching your career with these incredible companies, right? They got training and knowledge from university. They can go online and get more training and knowledge. Those aren't always connected to an actual outcome, right? The outcome is still typically sits on their shoulders. And so to close the skills, well, to invest in them first, give them that helping hand, give them the skills, but then also connect it to the outcome. That becomes such a compelling statement for talent trying to take their first step in their careers these days, right? And so, and that's why graduates today have really become familiar with the hire, train, deploy model as a catalyst for their career pathways.
It's a very, very cool, but there's a lot of moving parts and tends to be a little bit more strategic or a little bit complex in putting it together. You know, how do you put it? Where do you start? What are the components of a hire, train, deploy, type of program? What is the commercials, etc.?
Yeah, certainly. I can give a run at that, Ashleigh, and then obviously jump in. The hire, train, deploy concept is very simple, right? You hire, you train, you deploy, right? Behind the scenes, though, there's a lot of heavy lifting to put these models together, right? And over the years, what we've seen, and I tend to equate it to like a three-legged stool, which is you have to have all three components of the business up and running at a similar level. You can't be too far ahead in any one of these or that stool falls over, right? So you need the ability to attract talent into your program, right? But as we're talking being connected to an outcome, well, that means you need client demand for this model at the same time, or relatively at the same time. And just because you have client demand and talent interest, you've also got to build up your training capabilities to really round out the entirety of the model. So it's very simple on paper, very complex kind of under the scenes. And I'm thinking of that iceberg, right, where you don't see what's happening underneath the water, visual. So the proactive nature of these models is very appealing. But again, to be proactive, you got to have all that built out ahead of time, right? And then what I've also seen historically is you can't get too far ahead in any one of those capabilities, right? So if you build out your training capability, but it's just one technology, well, that becomes a limiter, because every customer we talk to wants a different technology put into their ecosystem, right? And these programs, the more effective ones, it isn't really static training. It's not just here's generic Java, good luck with that, right? You can get that online. You can probably go back to school and get generic Java. For the client, though, it's no. What is the actual tech stack we use in the combination of technologies to be impactful in our enterprise, right? And that's what clients need. They don't need more talent that's been trained somehow. They need talent that's ready to be impactful as quickly as possible, right? And so the hire, train, deploy model, being able to factor in the full tech stack to certain limits, right? And recreate the skill, not just to be check the box trained, but to recreate the skill to be impactful for that environment is really where the success of these models are ultimately judged upon. And then, the better companies continue to do it better and then at scale as well.
And from the client side, Steve's talking about all the complexities, but they didn't show us all that, right? We didn't know all the treading that was going on underwater. They made it as easy and seamless as possible for us. Though usually we would be interviewing a ton of different people and having to go through all of that headache. But when you're working through the right supplier with hire, train, deploy, they take it all off your plate, and it actually makes the process less complex, which is fantastic.
What's the kind of timeline would it from, hey, we want to think about this, to starting to see the trickle of grads out of the program and getting jobs? What would a typical timeline be in a program? And I know it's going to first answer, well, it depends. But on the other hand, you've probably seen a bunch of these over your career and can kind of give a gauge to the audience.
Certainly, yeah. Now there is one variable that it depends upon, and that is really the complexity of the tech stack that you're replicating in the training, right? Obviously, the more complex, the more training has to occur, so it's going to be a little bit longer. But on average, it's safe to expect a training program to be somewhere around 8 to 9 weeks of pure training, right? And again, because of the proactive nature of these models, a lot of hire, train, deploy vendors have the ability to create that talent pool very, very quickly. So once they have the parameters from the client, they can likely put together, a healthy talent pool within 2 weeks, maybe even 3 at the most, right? So you have to add that into, and certainly today with companies going back to the office, you have to factor in location restrictions and all these other dynamics that becomes part of the whole program. So if you're looking at 2 to 3 weeks to align talent, approximately 8 to 9 weeks for training, right? So you're looking at that 12-week kind of range on a standard program, not to factor in after the client does interviews and select their people, whatever their onboarding process looks like, right? For a contractor, that might be really, really quick, 1 or 2 weeks, might be 3 or 4, depending on the complexity of their systems and their processes. But that's what it would look like in the entirety. The interesting thing that we see coming next in the hire, train, deploy space is really a disruption on that time frame, which is going to just give incredible benefits to the client and to the talent. But we might save that for the next call.
Yeah, no problem. And to develop a solution like this, if let's say I was saying, hey, listen, we really constantly have a need for this skill set, and instead of just reacting, like you say, I want to build a strategic flow of trained candidates making impact and have a good flow, because we're always hiring that type of skill set.
Yep.
From that, hey, I got a light bulb in my head and I call Steve. What is it, a year, 6 months to set up a program? How does that look? Because like I say, that word strategic often means complex. And how long does that take for you to set up the program, start to build that talent pool? Like you said, you often will have an existing talent pool coming in looking for jobs that you can bring through into the program. But you're also going to have to build that a little bit for a specific client and the specific client's needs. So how long does that usually take? Is that like a couple of months, 6 months to build that out?
Well, the nice thing is, and much to what Ashleigh said earlier from a client perspective, a lot of work behind the scenes, but the client isn't meant to see any of that, right? It's meant to, be easy on their side. And so, but the timelines are going to be a lot quicker than you think, right? And so for us to customize a curriculum, it's usually a 30-minute phone call with a technical resource on the client side, just to understand their stack. And again, because of the proactive nature of our programs, we have some skeleton frameworks around different technologies already pre-built, right? And then it's really just refining and combining a few to replicate the tech stack for that client. So usually within about a week and a half, we come back with the refined curriculum, get a little, kind of approval from the customer. And that way we both know we're in line from a skill set creation perspective. The other proactive nature of our model is you're constantly letting talent who's coming out of college soon know about the model, our company, our mission, what their experience is going to be like. So it's more about, hey, if this model fits you, that's part of our proactive screening. So then we have a talent pool that then we can talk about, well, here's the client opportunity, the location restriction, the skill set you're going to learn, who wants to be a part of this program, right? And so it's first about getting them to buy into the experience of the model, not just the client itself, right? And so that allows us to react very, very quickly. And so in your scenario, if a client says, hey, we consume this skill set all the time. So how can we build out something for 2024 and we want to hire 200 people and we just need to spread that out throughout the maybe on a quarterly basis throughout the calendar year. Our question is, that's not a problem. Let's define the skill set, but also what are your location restrictions, right? It's usually not just one place. Maybe there's 5 or 6 areas where they need to balance out the skills. And then on top of that, what are your diversity initiatives these days? Because we can factor that into the proactive building of this model as well, right? And so for us, what we want the client to experience, and typically they do, is here's their need, here's the skill set. Let's factor in every other component about your program, location and diversity and that sort of thing. And then we just map it out on a quarterly basis that's executed, right? But it's because, again, behind the scenes, the proactive building of all these business units and all these capabilities that are so heavily intertwined, right? The reputation that you build within the talent space. So literally talent is lining up to want to have the opportunity to join your organization and your programs. That's all the heavy lifting behind the scenes that really has to be proactively done to really align these programs and give clients the easiest experience possible.
Commercially, how does it work? And what are some of the models that you've seen out there? Is it, does the student have to pay for some of the education? Does it work on kind of a placement per successful placement fee? Is it a try before you buy? So they come out of the training course and they're a consultant that's on contract, that there's a markup in the bill rate. Is it a cost plus where you build the training and you have an upfront cost for the employer to help develop this, and then some sort of success fee? How does it all work? And I threw out a bunch of the options. Not sure if any of them are actually correct, but I thought, hey, why don't I throw some of that out there?
Yeah. I'll speak to a few, Ashleigh, and then obviously you can relay how JP approached it. There are a couple different nuances to the model, Jeff, right? And I can speak to a few of them. So the traditional hire, train, deploy, and to us, those words are very, very important. Hire should represent the fact that you are investing in talent up front, right? And so the more common aspect of our model is they should never have to pay for these programs, right? This is not a boot camp where they're paying more money for more knowledge. Boot camps are great. If they want to go to the boot camp route, they can. This is more about most of this audience. They're just trying to figure out how to make their first tuition, repayment. And so what they typically don't need is another financial burden on their shoulders. And so we believe, especially in the next iteration of Hire, Train, Deploy 2.0, is it should be all about the upfront investment in talent themselves. They shouldn't have to pay anything for the program, shouldn't have to pay anything back for it. In our opinion, they shouldn't even have to sign contracts that obligate them where they have to give up freedoms for the first 2 years of their career, which unfortunately is very common in the Hire, Train, Deploy space. And so, so talent should be invested in. They should be paid while they're in training with no obligation to pay anything back. After the client comes in, does their interviews, handpicks their people. Again, these programs are set aside exclusively for that client, so they're not competing for talent, which is a lot of times a unique experience. Once they get through the contractor onboarding and their deployment actually starts, that is typically where there's an hourly bill rate attached to that individual for a contract period until they go full time. It's not an obligation, but that's typically the intent that they're going to become a long-term FTE strategy for that employer. That's the traditional model, right? We do see some staffing firms and other companies coming into this space, and we've seen the growth of a moniker called recruit, train, deploy, right? Which is they may be recruiting talent and lining them up for the client, but they want the client to make commitments up front and handpick people up front before they've even been trained. And so that's, in our opinion, that's ebbing back towards, well, I want the client to take on risk and cost and commitment, and not me as the vendor, the partner, actually taking on any risk or responsibility, right? And for us, we define partnership as shared risk and shared responsibility, because we know that word is used everywhere these days, right? And so we step away from programs where it puts any of that onus back on the end employer, right? This is all about taking that off their shoulders, where they don't have to commit up front and hope things work out. They don't have to take on risk. This is about a model that does it for them, so they can come at the end of the day and be hyper confident of who's really ready for their environment, right? And so those are some of the unique models that we see. There's a bunch of spinoffs from that, right? It's but the traditional hire, train, deploy model is less about the client commitment, and it should be more about the vendor's commitment.
So in that commercials, you're hiring the person for the 8 or 9 weeks and not getting compensated for it, or do you get it, but you get compensated on the try before you buy contract?
Yes. Yeah, it becomes an employer paid model. And note that they're still contractors when they first join that customer, right? So that employer. So even long term, that employer's risk is mitigated because they're a contractor that can unfortunately be let go at any moment, whether it's a business need or performance need or just, whatever need it might be. And so that risk on the employer side is mitigated long term, and it really stays on our shoulders. And that's where we get back to something I mentioned earlier, which is the only thing these programs are really judged on is not if somebody was trained, it's if somebody was prepared to be impactful for the team they joined, right? And so if they're not prepared to be impactful as quickly as possible, the client doesn't have to keep them on as a contractor, which means you've cheated the client, you've actually cheated the talent, the individual, because you didn't prepare them to be impactful. And that's the single variable these models are and should be judged upon. But that puts the onus back on us, right? Of making sure we're really putting their feet in the fire, so to speak, of proving ground if they're actually ready to deliver these skills, that the full package in terms of professional skills, communication skills, all those other pieces. It does us no good to sort of nudge them through a program and help them graduate, because it's not going to work out on the tail end, right? And so that's where a lot of that due diligence, even during training, really starts taking shape.
I'm trying to think about this model as another source of talent, more strategic source of talent and developing our talent versus always just reacting and recruiting in talent, and chasing our tail often. Where do we start, right? And how do I identify opportunities to actually have a business case or an ROI in this? What sort of volume? What areas? Can it be only in technology, or are there other areas like call center and customer service, etc., that this model has been successful?
Yeah, it's the most prevalent space that these models truly excel is in that traditional IT skill set. So software developers, cloud developers or engineers, data engineers. There have been some offshoots that go a little bit more towards call center or customer service type roles. The financials behind it start to change because it's hard to make large upfront investments in that skill set, but still come out with some sort of bill rate at the end of the day that fits the market kind of scenario, right? There are models like this for salespeople, right? In sales industries. We haven't seen a lot of these models specifically in like health IT and some of those niche areas, but we know it will grow there, simply because the model is the same: hire, train, deploy, right? And if you just change the skill set as you work people through the program, it's truly applicable across industry. And we've seen, especially in the last 5 years, the growth beyond, fintech has always been an early adopter of this model, but it has definitely gone across just about every industry possible, because everyone's still looking for great talent that's already been proven, that's already been trained on what I need them to know, and I can come in and just handpick the people without having to compete for them, and everybody can move forward with a strong sense of confidence, right? But minimize risk, minimize commitment, all that sort of thing. And so that resonates across industry. And so we've seen tremendous growth. I think the concept of hire, train, deploy will absolutely continue to be a part of the future and a small piece of the overall talent ecosystem pie, regardless of industry, regardless of skill set, frankly, because it answers so many questions on both sides. Even in the procurement industry, right? We've had leaders in procurement, kind of talk to us about, most people don't come out of college with a procurement degree, right? Most people don't even know about procurement when they're coming out of college, much like IT recruiting. And so, but if there's a model like this that could take communications majors or business majors and give them some sort of condensed, accelerated training specifically to those environments, think of what that skill set starts to look like and what the outcome for the client starts to look like as well. And so that's where this is going to go 100%.
Amazing. Well, Ashleigh, Steve, thank you for your time today. It's been an amazing conversation talking about this very strategic and very interesting, source of talent and ability to strategically develop talent for your own organizations is so important and something that we got to think about these days. So again, thank you very much for your time.
Likewise,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
We appreciate it.